You ever have one of those nights where everything feels off? Like the air is thick, heavy with secrets you can't quite put your finger on? That was the night it all began, the night I found out my wife had been sleeping with my son. It started like any other evening. I came home late from work, tired but content. Sarah usually greeted me at the door, her smile warm and inviting. But tonight, she wasn't there. The house was quiet, too quiet. Too still. Something about it made my skin crawl. I called out her name as I walked through the front door. No answer. Jake's room was dark, his bed untouched. Weird. He always left a light on when he stayed up late studying or playing video games. My gut tightened. Something wasn't right. Then I heard it, a faint whisper coming from upstairs. It wasn't just one voice, it was two. Familiar voices. Voices I knew better than anyone else's. My heart pounded as I crept toward the sound, each step creaking underfoot. I stopped outside Jake's closed bedroom door, pressing my ear against the wood. What I heard next nearly shattered me. "Are you sure this is what we want?" Sarah's voice trembled, soft but laced with desire. "Yes," Jake replied, his tone deeper than I'd ever heard it before. "We've waited long enough." Waited for what? My mind raced, trying to piece together the puzzle. Was this some kind of joke? Some twisted game they were playing? Or, no. No way. Not my family. Not them. But then came the sound that confirmed my worst fears, the unmistakable rustle of clothing, followed by low moans. Moans that sent ice coursing through my veins. I wanted to burst in, confront them, demand answers. But I couldn't move. My legs felt rooted to the spot, my body frozen in shock. Instead, I stumbled back down the stairs, clutching the railing to keep myself upright. In the kitchen, I poured myself a glass of whiskey, though my hands shook so badly half of it spilled onto the counter. As I sat there nursing the drink, the weight of their betrayal settled over me like a suffocating blanket. How could they do this? How could she do this? The woman I loved, the mother of my child, how could she betray me like this? To understand how we got here, you need to know who we were before this happened. Before the lies, before the secrets, before the pain. Back when life was simple, or at least, seemed that way. Sarah and I met in college, during our sophomore year. She was beautiful, fiery, full of dreams and ambition. I was, well, let's just say I wasn't much to look at. Average Joe, working part-time jobs to pay tuition. But she saw something in me, something others didn't. Maybe it was my steadiness, my willingness to listen when she needed someone to talk to. Whatever it was, it worked. We fell hard and fast, and by the time we graduated, we were inseparable. Our early years together were pure magic. We laughed, fought, made love under the stars. There wasn't a moment I didn't feel lucky to have her. When we decided to start a family, it only deepened our bond. Jake was born 9 months later, a little miracle who brought us closer than ever. Or so I thought. Looking back now, I realize how blind I was. How oblivious I remained to the cracks forming beneath the surface. Sure, there were signs, little things I dismissed as unimportant. Like the way Sarah would sometimes space out during dinner, staring into the distance with a faraway look in her eyes. Or the times Jake acted distant, almost cold toward me, while being overly affectionate with her. I chalked it up to teenage hormones, to growing pains. Never once did I suspect the truth. And oh, the truth hurts. More than anything I've ever experienced. After that fateful night, I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd heard. What exactly had been going on between them? For how long? And most importantly, why? Determined to find answers, I decided to dig deeper. First stop, Sarah's phone. I knew it was wrong, but desperation has a way of clouding judgment. Using a password recovery app one downloaded online, I hacked into her device. What I discovered turned my stomach. Hundreds of messages exchanged between her and Jake. Messages filled with longing, passion, and guilt. Guilt? So they knew what they were doing was wrong. Good to know. Here's an excerpt from one of their conversations. Jake, Mom, I can't stop thinking about you. Every time I see you, I want to pull you close and never let go. Sarah, you scare me sometimes, Jake. This isn't normal. But I can't deny how I feel. Jake, neither can I. We're meant to be together. Nothing else matters. Reading those words, I felt sick. Sick and betrayed. How could they justify this? How could they think it was okay? But it wasn't just the texts. There were photos too, intimate moments captured on camera. Pictures of them laughing, smiling, holding hands. Even worse, there were videos. Videos of them kissing, touching, whispering sweet nothings into each other's ears. Each frame cut deeper than the last, carving away pieces of my soul. By the time I finished scrolling through her phone, I was numb. Numb and empty, like a hollow shell of the man I used to be. Yet, despite the pain, a small part of me still clung to hope. Maybe they'd tell me the truth if I confronted them. Maybe they'd admit their mistakes and beg for forgiveness. Boy, was I wrong. The next morning, I cornered Sarah in the kitchen. She was making breakfast, humming softly to herself. Innocent, carefree. If I hadn't seen the evidence with my own eyes, I might have believed the act. What's going on between you and Jake? I asked, my voice steady but trembling inside. She froze mid-motion, the spatula slipping from her hand. What are you talking about, Joe? She said, turning to face me. Her expression was calm, almost serene. Too serene. Don't play dumb with me, I snapped. I heard you two last night. I read the messages. I saw the pictures. Now tell me the truth. Her face paled, and for a second, I thought she might cry. Instead, she straightened her shoulders, meeting my gaze head-on. Fine, she said. If you're going to accuse me, you deserve to know. Yes, Jake and I have feelings for each other. Deep, powerful feelings. And yes, we've acted on them. But don't judge us until you hear the whole story. The whole story? I echoed, incredulous. There is no whole story, Sarah. You're my wife. He's my son. What the hell is wrong with you? Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't back down. Love doesn't follow rules, Joe. Sometimes it happens where you least expect it. You wouldn't understand because you've never taken risks for love. Her words stung, cutting deeper than any insult ever could. Risks for love? Is that what she called this? Betraying everything we built together? Before I could respond, Jake appeared in the doorway, his presence adding fuel to the fire. Dad, please try to understand, he pleaded. Mom and I, we belong together. You don't get it because you're stuck in the past. Stuck in the past? Me? The guy whose world was crumbling around him? I wanted to scream, to yell, to throw something across the room. But instead, I did the only thing I could, I walked away. Away from the house, away from the people I loved, and into the unknown. Because if they weren't mine anymore, then maybe it was time to find someone who truly was. After walking out of the house, I didn't go far. I drove aimlessly for hours, my mind racing with questions. How could this be happening? What did they plan to do next? And who else was involved? That last question nagged at me the most. Something about their behavior felt off. Too calculated, too deliberate. Like they weren't acting alone. So, when dawn broke and the world came alive again, I decided to dig deeper. Not just into Sarah and Jake's betrayal but into whatever larger game they might have been playing. First stop, Sarah's boutique downtown. It was still early, so the shop wasn't open yet. But through the window, I spotted Lisa, the employee who'd hinted at Sarah's odd behavior before. She was unlocking the door, setting up for the day. Perfect timing. "Lisa," I called as she stepped outside to grab a box from her car. She turned, surprised to see me. "Mr. Carter. What brings you here?" "I need to talk," I said, pulling her aside. "It's important." She hesitated but eventually nodded. We sat at a nearby cafe, where I laid it all out, what I'd heard, what I'd seen, and what I suspected. At first, Lisa looked shocked. Then suspicious. Finally, she sighed and leaned closer. "You're right," she admitted quietly. "There is something strange going on. Mrs. Carter's been acting weird lately, taking calls in private, meeting people after hours. And those meetings aren't just business-related." "Who?" I demanded. "Who is she meeting?" Lisa glanced around nervously. "I don't know his name, but he's tall, dark-haired, always dressed in black. Shows up late at night, whispers to her like they're sharing secrets. Sometimes, I think they argue. Other times, they laugh like old friends." A chill ran down my spine. Who was this mystery man? And why hadn't I noticed him before? Back home, I couldn't shake Lisa's words. That night, I stayed awake, replaying every detail in my head. Suddenly, a memory surfaced, one I'd buried years ago. A man named Marcus, a childhood friend of Sarah's who disappeared shortly after we got married. Rumor had it, he was mixed up in some shady dealings, gambling debts, and worse. I hadn't thought about him in ages, but now, his face haunted me. Could Marcus be the mysterious figure Lisa described? If so, what role did he play in all this? Determined to find answers, I visited an old acquaintance of mine, Detective Tom Harris. He owed me a favor from back when I helped him solve a minor case involving stolen goods at my workplace. After hearing my story, Tom agreed to help, albeit reluctantly. "We'll need proof," he warned. "No wild accusations or half-baked theories. Solid evidence." So, over the next few days, I gathered everything I could: photos, videos, financial records, even phone logs. With Tom's guidance, I traced Sarah's recent transactions and uncovered something alarming: large sums of money transferred to offshore accounts. Not just hers, but Jake's too. They were planning something big, and it wasn't good. But the real shock came when I hacked into Jake's laptop, another illegal move, but desperate times call for desperate measures. Hidden deep within his files, I found documents detailing a scheme to sell our house, liquidate assets, and disappear without a trace. Worse still, there were blueprints of the property, marked with escape routes and rendezvous points. This wasn't just about love anymore. This was about theft, deception, and possibly even fraud. Armed with evidence, I went back to Tom. Together, we devised a plan to catch Sarah, Jake, and whoever else was involved red-handed. The key was patience. We couldn't rush things. If we tipped them off, they'd vanish forever. Tom suggested setting up surveillance cameras around the house and planting bugs in strategic locations. Meanwhile, I played along, pretending nothing was amiss. Every night, I acted normal, engaging in small talk while secretly recording their conversations. One evening, during dinner, Sarah dropped a bombshell. "Joe," she said casually, "Jake and I are thinking of taking a trip. Just a short getaway to clear our heads." My stomach churned. "Where to?" "Canada," she replied smoothly. "We've booked tickets for next week." "Next week?" "No way. If they left, they'd never come back." That's when I knew it was time to act. The night before their supposed trip, I confronted them. Both of them. Cornered them in the living room, holding up the damning evidence I'd collected. You think I'm stupid? I growled, slamming the stack of papers onto the coffee table. You think I wouldn't notice what you've been doing? Selling us out, stealing from me, planning to run away together? Well, guess what? I'm not letting you get away with it. Sarah stared at me, her expression unreadable. Jake, however, looked genuinely terrified. Dad, please. No. I interrupted. You don't get to plead your case. You betrayed me. Both of you. And now, you're going to pay for it. Before either of them could respond, the front door burst open. Tom and his team stormed in, guns drawn. Freeze! Tom barked. You're under arrest. For a moment, chaos reigned. Sarah screamed, Jake resisted, and I stood frozen, watching the life I once knew crumble before my eyes. But amidst the confusion, something unexpected happened. From the shadows emerged a figure I hadn't expected to see again, Marcus. His presence confirmed my worst fears. He'd been orchestrating the entire operation. Using Sarah and Jake as pawns, manipulating them into stealing everything I owned. But here's the twist, Marcus wasn't working alone. As the police closed in, another voice echoed through the room. Drop your weapon, Detective Harris, came a cold, calculating tone. From behind Tom, a masked figure raised a gun, aiming directly at him. Wait, what? In that instant, everything changed. The person holding the gun revealed themselves, not someone I recognized, but someone familiar nonetheless. It was Lisa, Sarah's trusted employee. Her betrayal cut deeper than anything else because I'd believed her, trusted her, relied on her information. As it turned out, Lisa and Marcus were partners in crime. They'd used Sarah and Jake as scapegoats, framing them for the theft while lining their own pockets. The affair? A distraction. The scheme? Brilliantly executed. With the truth finally exposed, Tom arrested everyone involved, Marcus, Lisa, Sarah, and Jake. Even though justice was served, I couldn't celebrate. My family was gone, my trust shattered, and my heart broken beyond repair. Yet, as I sat alone in the quiet aftermath, one thought lingered, maybe, just maybe, this nightmare would lead to something better. A fresh start. A new chapter. Because no matter how dark the past becomes, the future always holds possibilities. And maybe, just maybe, I'd find peace again someday. After the dust settled, I was left standing in the wreckage of my life. The house that once symbolized happiness now felt like a prison, a cold, hollow place filled with echoes of betrayal. The police hauled Sarah, Jake, Marcus, and Lisa away, their faces pale as they realized the full extent of their crimes. But even as justice seemed to prevail, questions lingered in my mind. How far did this conspiracy go? Were there others involved who had yet to be uncovered? And what about me? What role did I play in all of this? Had I been blind, or had I unknowingly contributed to their schemes? For days, I avoided leaving the house, consumed by guilt and anger. Guilt for not seeing the signs sooner, and anger at the people I trusted most turning against me. Detective Tom stopped by occasionally to update me on the investigation, but his words offered little comfort. Marcus is cooperating, he told me one afternoon, sitting across from me in the living room. He's spilling everything, the offshore accounts, the fake identities, the whole operation. But here's the kicker, he claims Sarah and Jake weren't fully aware of the bigger picture. I stared at him, incredulous. What are you saying? Tom leaned forward, his expression grave. He says he manipulated them, used their feelings for each other to keep them compliant. According to Marcus, Sarah thought she was protecting you, and Jake believed he was doing what was best for his mom. They were pawns, Joe. Pawns in a much larger game. I didn't know whether to believe him. Part of me wanted to think Sarah and Jake hadn't acted out of pure malice, but another part screamed that it didn't matter, they'd still betrayed me. Still lied. Still destroyed my life. Weeks passed, and the case against Marcus, Lisa, Sarah, and Jake grew stronger. Evidence piled up, and the media began reporting on the scandal, labeling it the Maple Lane Conspiracy. My name surfaced in articles, though thankfully, my identity remained protected. Still, the attention brought unwanted scrutiny, forcing me to confront the reality that my life would never return to normal. One day, while going through old files in the attic, I stumbled upon something unexpected, a dusty box labeled Sarah's Keepsakes. Inside were letters, photos, and trinkets from our early years together, reminders of happier times. At the bottom of the box, however, I found something else entirely, a folded piece of paper with an address scribbled on it. The handwriting wasn't familiar, it was too neat, too deliberate. Curious, I unfolded the note and read its contents. If you ever need answers, come to 428 Pine Street. Ask for Mr. Langley. Who was Mr. Langley? And why did someone leave this message for Sarah? Without hesitation, I grabbed my keys and headed out, determined to uncover whatever secrets lay hidden at 428 Pine Street. Pine Street was located on the outskirts of town, a quiet neighborhood lined with modest homes. Number 428 stood near the end of the block, a weathered two-story house with peeling paint and overgrown bushes. As I approached, I noticed the curtains twitch slightly, as if someone inside was watching me. Taking a deep breath, I knocked on the door. After a moment, it creaked open to reveal an elderly man with sharp eyes and a kindly smile. "Can I help you?" he asked. "I'm looking for Mr. Langley," I replied, clutching the note in my hand. His gaze sharpened, and he stepped aside. "Come in," he said simply. Inside, the house smelled faintly of lavender and old books. Mr. Langley led me to a cozy sitting room, where we sat across from each other. He studied me carefully before speaking. "You're Joseph Carter, aren't you?" he asked. "Yes," I answered cautiously. "How do you know my name?" Mr. Langley sighed, leaning back in his chair. "Because your wife came to me years ago, seeking advice. She confided in me about her struggles, about feeling trapped in a life she didn't choose. She loved you, Joe, truly she did. But sometimes love isn't enough to overcome circumstances beyond our control." My heart sank. Was he defending her actions? Justifying her betrayal? "No excuses," I snapped. "She crossed a line she shouldn't have." He nodded solemnly. "True. But let me tell you something else. That note wasn't meant for her, it was meant for you. It's a clue, Joe. A key to understanding the truth behind everything that's happened." Before I could ask what he meant, he handed me a folder filled with documents. Bank statements, emails, photographs, all pointing to a shocking revelation: Marcus wasn't acting alone. There was someone higher up the chain, someone pulling strings from the shadows. Someone whose identity shook me to my core. As I sifted through the papers, one name kept appearing: Detective Tom Harris. At first, I refused to believe it. Tom had been my ally throughout this ordeal, the one person I trusted completely. But the evidence was undeniable. Emails between Tom and Marcus revealed a partnership dating back years. Together, they'd orchestrated countless scams, using unsuspecting families as pawns in their elaborate games. And me? I'd been their latest mark. Fury boiled within me as I stormed out of Mr. Langley's house, heading straight for the police station. When I confronted Tom, his initial denial quickly gave way to resignation. "You wouldn't understand," he muttered, his voice tinged with regret. "This job, it eats at you. The power, the money, it gets under your skin until you can't see straight anymore." But explanations didn't matter. By the time I left the station, Tom was in handcuffs, his career and life ruined. In the weeks that followed, the pieces finally fell into place. Marcus, Lisa, Sarah, Jake, and now Tom, all part of a web of deceit spun by greed and ambition. Their plans unraveled, their futures uncertain. For me, however, the road ahead remained unclear. Did I forgive Sarah and Jake? Could I rebuild trust after everything they'd done? Or was it time to move on, to start fresh somewhere new? One evening, as I sat on the porch watching the sunset, I realized the answer didn't matter. What mattered was surviving, learning from the past without letting it define me. Life moves forward, no matter how painful the journey may be. And so, with a heavy heart but renewed determination, I packed my bags and left Maple Lane behind. Where I went next, only time would tell. But one thing was certain, I wouldn't look back. Because sometimes, the greatest betrayal isn't from others, it's from ourselves. And redemption, when it comes, is the sweetest kind of victory.